Welcome back, Cleaning Fraternity. I wanted to go over water-fed poles and break this video up into a couple of main sections. I wanted to show you how to repair your existing water-fed pole with obtaining replacement parts, and all those parts can be seen at ionicsystems.com.au, and I'll put links below. And removing that existing part and re-securing it with glue and fixings if required. I wanted to show you tips and tricks with cutting carbon, what I've learnt along the way, and explain how we can salvage a section as part of a repair instead of a complete section replacement. And then I wanted to break the video down into, you might like to change your existing section to enable adaptation, whether it's a scraper, a camera, to be able to fit a different style of brush through fixings. So I wanted to show you how we can modify that section to be able to make it more universal in whatever water-fed pole that you do have. So I'll give you a brief overview of typical damage. You may have busted body clamps. The body clamps with the link below will direct you back to the website. Take note, each body clamp by the letter I of Ionic has a part number. That number will reflect the body clamp when ordering, so that's a really good tip and trick. The butt rings at the bottom of the pole, if you look inside the butt ring, also has a number, so you can order that section in regards to the section of the pole. So a couple of accidents that have happened here. This one was, most of the instances occur when they're dropped. So you can see carbon is not really forgiving. And this section here has split, and it's split in multiple segments there. So is this section throwaway? No. We can keep this section, cut this section back and modify it to enable reinsertion into the pole to keep you working at a minimal price. So that's one particular section which has been damaged there. Here we have another section, and we can see here that it's cracked circumferentially like that. So in this particular instance, I would suggest that the pole may be overextended, and we can see there where the body clamp may have been tightened, and with maximum pressure and not having that pole overlap in the safety aspect of the red band has put pressure on that section, only clamping it at max height, and it's failed there. So it's failed in that direction, and it's also resulting in splitting running up the pole. So is that pole salvageable? Yes, it is. So we can cut that. The witness marks and the overlap marks will vary between the sections. So before you do any modifications like this, take note of the witness band, and we can replicate that by determining where the damage does end, making a cut there, and then reapplying that witness mark in regards to whether it's a red or yellow for the different makeup of the pole, and just replicating that further up that section. And that can be with some tape. We can tape that off, and preferably some acrylic paint, which is fast drying and etching, to remark that going forward. So we can see that it's cracked there. Now the last one I'll show you, a couple of extras actually. The butt ring on this particular pole has been smashed on the ground. So tip and trick too, whenever we do repairs like this, and we'll run through it, make sure that the sections are separated. So we don't want to glue sections to sections. And that butt ring, we can remove the glue from this particular handle section of the Hydra, which, if you're unaware, have British standards approval, 1000 volts AC, 1500 volts DC, to keep you working safe. We can remove the glue. Butt rings are sort of sacrificial in regards to, they do cop a bit of a workout, so we could glue this on permanently. You could grab a little bit of silicone overnight and just put a blob of silicone here to re-secure that butt ring to allow easy removal down the track if it's ever broken again. Or we could use some epoxy resin, which we'll do in this case anyway, to re-secure that permanently, and we'll go from there. The last one is, so all the different heads within the Ionic range have names, trade names. We have Swift, Grafter, which is a Euro thread, and Vertigo. So this particular Swift was dropped at height. It's a 45 foot, and we've broken the ferrule on the end. So we're going to remove this ferrule, cut the pop rivets, we're going to de-rivet, we're going to show you how to cut this off and re-secure and reattach. Stay tuned. So initially I mentioned modifications. So if you have a particular head style and you would like to change to add something to that first section, I can show you, and I'd like to run you through that process. So it might be adding a scraper, a camera, or a different attachment and makeup of a water-fed brush. So within the Ionic range and water-fed poles in general, there's usually a couple of different key sizes, section 1 being the closest section to the brush. So the original sizes, which are probably post about 5 years ago, are 22.75 mil. So we can gauge that with a vernier measuring the outside diameter of that section. The new section 1s are a lot thinner and they measure in at 20 mil. So if you wanted to change between different head types, and Ionic have within their range Swift, Vertigo, a Euro thread, Grafter thread, or another particular pole, we can talk about removing that existing head, and with links below, installing one of Ionic's Euro thread adapters, Grafter thread adapters, in that section 1 to enable you to attach an amplitude of products, including water-fed brushes. And we'll show you how to cut the carbon and reinsert a particular section into that first section of section 1 of your pole. So I'll just run you through cutting the carbon. So we have a section 1 here, an older section at 22.75 mils. So this particular cut could be you have a head section on it that you'd like to remove and adapt to another variation, or we have a damaged section, we'd like to salvage this particular section. So there's a couple of ways of cutting carbon with tools that you should have ready access to. You could use a hacksaw blade and a very, very fine tooth blade. I often find cutting through a taped section will give you a better chance of cutting the carbon. Within the range, Ionic have glass poles, they have carbon poles, and then they have high modulus carbon. It all still cuts the same. But if we are quite coarse and aggressive when cutting, it splinters. So you'll find, even with a fine tooth hacksaw blade, you'll get through a majority of the cut, and just that last little section, you'll splinter the section like that. So you need to then cut it again. So what I've learnt is, and I've just installed a little bit of tape on this section 1 here, I suggest a good mask, wear your PPE, pair of safety glasses, and a fine cut-off wheel on an angle grinder. So it could be pneumatic or battery operated, electric. So if you look for stainless steel discs, and this particular disc is only, just under 1.5 mil, this will give you the best opportunity to cut that straight through there and not splintering. So as you can see there, we have a nice clean cut. So if we were going to repair this pole, we could then just take a little bit of emery paper and clean up that section, just to remove the sharp edge. And that section is then salvageable and then ready to go. So we've removed the damaged section where that pole did split. And you can see there, so we identified the damage had extended to a certain point and then removed that from the section. So that section then could be reused. If we'd like to modify that pole, we could then insert a particular fitting, part numbers and links below, into that section of the pole. So what I would suggest is some white spirits, so that could be methylated spirits or something like isopropyl, a clean rag to wipe out the inside. The inserts that come with the section are smooth, so just remove the mask. So I would also suggest taking your angle grinder and giving the glue something to bite on. A few notches in that particular fitting, and the fitting does come in a stepped fitting for the smaller diameter section ones. So this Grafter Euro thread will take an angle crank. On that angle crank we could put a majority of tooling, whether that's a paint roller, a scraper, a water-fed brush, a camera, and that's quite a universal connection. So we would then mix up some 5-minute epoxy resin, this particular brand's Araldite, in a predetermined application and mixing batch. We would squirt a little bit onto a bit of cardboard. I often have some spoons, disposable spoons, the white spirits in regards to cleaning up after ourselves, and we can then go through and carry out the repair. Put a little bit of glue on the inside of the section, and depending on the outside temperature, the 5-minute epoxy resin will let you know how quick you do need to work with it. Smear a bit on the outside. An even coat. The tolerance is quite tight, so often going to extrude the resin. And then with a bit more cloth, you can push that home. All the way through. We can wipe that clean. So the white spirits will help you clean up that section. To further secure that, we can also do more modifications. So while the glue is wet, I would suggest we can add a rivet. So I have a 332 pop. I'm just going to drill that through there. Aluminium pop rivets are probably best in this application. And just some hand squeezes. We can put that in there. And just pull that tight. So that's a repair or modification. That's a modification back to, could have been any particular head type, back to Euro Grafter thread. See, even the tape line that I'd put on, I didn't follow it myself, so but we still ended up with a nice clean cut, and we haven't destroyed the section or splintered the section further. So I can just run that over with a bit of emery to deburr that edge, and that section now is then ready to use. If you wanted to reinsert that witness mark, as discussed before, just tape it up. The acrylic's fast drying and will bite into the existing resin, and that'll give you your overlap. The overlap will vary with section and makeup of the pole to allow maximum strength of that particular pole. So with this pole, which we mentioned earlier, the butt ring, the base of the pole is damaged. So I have extended the sections. These are internally threaded poles to remove the quick disconnect out of the way. So the last thing we want to do is glue sections of pole together. So with a Stanley knife, I can remove any excess glue. The butt rings are quite quite a loose fit, which are taken up, and you can see the thickness of the existing glue there. That take up a reasonable amount of tolerance, so we don't need to get this particularly 100% clean. We'll just take the larger bits off. We'll just do a trial fit, and that goes straight on. These particular poles have a chamfer in regards to more so when the pole hose is hot, to be able to pull up into the groove for cut off. So depending on whether you're left or right handed, depends on whether you might put the groove on the left side of the pole or the right side of the pole. Some more mixing trays. Very handy when you're working with glue, depending on how messy you are. And if I work with glue here, I'll find it at the front of the shop. So having your spoons, your cups all ready to go is often a good thing. So the epoxy resin, if you are doing a large quantity, will come in different drying times. So be aware of that. And we generally, there's two ways of doing this, which I sort of said before. We could probably use a little bit of silicone just to temporarily put that fitting on if it was used in a heavy environment. And the poles are getting bashed around quite a lot. So you just remove the dust there. Now you don't want to glue the poles together, the sections together. So whenever you do repairs on a section of a pole, make sure you strip the pole down and separate the sections, especially with body clamps. It's quite important that we don't glue those sections together. Some glue there. Other way. This particular pole, I'm going to line it up with the largest clamp there. It's going to go on about there. Put that on there. Wipe away the excess. A bit of white metho or isopropyl to clean up, and that's okay. We'll keep that pole extended so we don't glue those sections together, and put that aside. It's the same in regards to if we're replacing a body clamp. I did talk about separating the sections so we don't glue the sections together. So if this was a particular section and we are replacing that one body clamp, and I'll show you on the next repair, if it hasn't come off as a whole, a vibrating saw is quite handy, and I'll show you how to cut that off. So the mating surface of the body clamp is probably 1.5 centimetres. So you would put that in, take note of how far it actually goes in. You would then grab some emery paper and rough up that section all the way around, so that you scuff the section and you get a better bond. Then, as we did before, some white spirits, wipe it down, some epoxy resin around the outer diameter, and then just push that body clamp back on. So it doesn't matter in relation to orientation, just being a single clamp on a single section. Wipe off the excess, then look down the guts as well and make sure you haven't gone with the extreme with the glue and you haven't got glue squirted or squeezed out in that section. If you have, don't panic. a cloth and some white spirits again, and just remove that excess resin or epoxy from the inside of the section so it's nice and clean. So that will allow the assembly of the sections. The next repair is going to be a bit of a challenge, and I'll move it around. So it's on a newer type pole, and the pole was up at height and was dropped. So it's on a 20 millimetre diameter, having a newer, thinner section. So the ferrule on this particular section is glued and riveted. So what I'm going to do, and it's broken off straight through there, so what I'm going to do is cut the ferrule. Having a smaller diameter section, it is stepped to enable to back to the ferrule. So I'm going to de-rivet it, cut the ferrule, prise it off, clean it up, and reattach. Just some 532 alley pops. So probably wouldn't recommend stainless or steel. Just a soft aluminium would be all you require. Now, a vibrating saw is probably one tool that you wouldn't have ready access to. Probably more of a carpentry tool, but absolutely fantastic. So you can get various vibrating blades and even knives, which enable you to cut in very close tolerances and against other objects without damaging them. So, not a dangerous tool, but one which is quite handy to have in the toolkit. So we'll get here. Okay, so move a little of the ferrule. They are sort of designed not to be removed. That step at the end is a step up for the original ferrules. So on the Swift, they're available across all poles, but come in very handy, I find personally, in the 45, 55, 65 and 80 foot poles. So they allow a rigid neck, which allows maximum rigidity at height. The goosenecks can be up to 900mm to allow those goosenecks to go over ledges and bits and pieces like that. So especially at height, you want maximum rigidity. So they are quite a purpose-built bit of kit. So we are at the end of this section, so we can be quite liberal with the glue, the epoxy, and can put a good smear on that. Clean up. I can nearly line up my rivet holes again. And we can push all that on all the way home. So, that's all the way home there again. Final cleanup. .532, I'll just clear out my holes. So just to summarise, we've run through two main categories. One, pole repairs, and which also includes replacement of part and salvage, and then pole modification. So the repairs, we talked about cutting carbon. So the finer blade that you have access to, and it needs to be around that mil and a half, will allow you to cut that. Running the masking tape around will give you a line to cut, and even my second cut, I wasn't that great, but I was able to repair and salvage the cut. Be aware of cutting carbon in your PPE, so a mask and safety specs. So that cut can be used to salvage that particular section, even if you were replacing a body clamp and you didn't want to remove that body clamp manually through a vibrating saw, you could cut that body clamp off. You are going to lose sort of 20-25 mil of that section. Does that matter? Not necessarily. Then preparing that section to be glued, a bit of emery paper where possible, some white spirits as in metho or isopropyl, wiping, and then using some epoxy high strength resin to re-glue that. So we replaced a body clamp, we cut a section, we repaired a ferrule, and then we tied that all in as well as if you wanted modifications. So those modifications could be cutting your section one off, whatever head style you have, or whatever water-fed pole you have, and then reinsertion of Ionic Grafter Euro thread, which could allow an amplitude of products and brushes to suit your pole. Catch us on the web, check out all the videos. I'll put a link to that on the rest of our, or under our YouTube channel here in Australia, which is Blue Tongue Industries. We appreciate you watching, and we'll chat on the next video.